Catalina Florina Florescu. Tonight we are going to talk about your edited collection, Transnational Narratives in Englishes of Exile. And I wanted to it's just that I have to start by noticing how beautiful the cover is and how much it tells about what the book is trying to do, namely to bring people together even though they have to overcome huge distances in order to be together. And this reminded me of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel and God giving life to Adam, but obviously there you've got a relationship of authority, which here is dissolved into a kind of equality between people coming from different places. And I think that's wonderful, and this is part of the very generous message that this book is transmitting, namely that we live in a world in which exiles and Englishes are a matter of fact, so we have to talk about Englishes in the plural. So could you please tell us a little bit about this book we'll be discussing and how you got the idea, how you decided to do a collection on this topic? You are interested in exile as a lifetime project, so this must have come at a certain stage in your development as a creative writer and an academic.
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction and for having us today. The collection Transnational Narratives in Englishes of Exile was a project that started in 2013 with a call for papers, and then in 2017 it was finally published. I was born in Romania in a region called Dobroja. And when I visited this beautiful town, Constanța, I saw the statue of Ovid, the exile Roman poet. And I didn't know his story back then, but later I found out about the conditions of his exile, and I was truly impressed. And in the middle of his tragedy, Ovid was able to compose, to pour out his feelings towards being in a different place. And little did I know then that years after the first time I saw the statue of Ovid in Constanța, I would be living in the United States of America. I have spent 20 years here, and as Sabina said, this is a work in progress. Even if it's done, it's still a work in progress. It's going to continue with other collections on the vast literature of immigration. What I wanted very much to accomplish in this collection was to focus on a few words that are in the title. The first one is Englishes, the second one is transnational, and of course exile. All these words are very important for the collection. They speak about different perceptions of Englishes. They speak about people who try to communicate, try to leave something behind, and they also speak about acknowledging everybody's Englishes. It's not one English, but it's in plural. It should be used in plural. The inspiration, again, it's something personal, and it's going to extend after, beyond my interest in immigration, personal and professional.
Well, exile is of many kinds, isn't it? So we can be exiled at home, just as we can be exiled in a language. And actually, I really love what you say about your own accented English as doing justice to your European origins in the introduction. So I think that's something we should actually be proud of. I mean, of course, English is a language that's native to a lot of countries, but so many people also speak it in the global space as a language for communication across huge distances. And I think this is even more valuable because, in fact, you end up saying things that you would never say if you didn't have to cross borders and to reinvent yourself in new spaces. And well, speaking of crossing borders and spaces, geographical spaces and spaces of the mind, I keep insisting on the fact that you are also a creative writer, or maybe you're primarily a creative writer. I got to know you when you contributed to a collection I was editing many years ago on transnational women's migration, and I noticed that you were writing in a way that blended memoir with academic writing, and that's what you tend to do all the time. And so I was wondering, and I don't know if you wanted to tell us a few things about this, why you advertised this book so stubbornly as your last academic book, which I strongly believe it's not going to be by what you've just said, but
yes. This is another edited collection. My first book was about the human body when it becomes ill, and it was a single-authored book. And there I couldn't combine my creative and academic writing. It was exclusively academic. The second book was about mothers, or more specifically women, who are trying to negotiate their new lives and the pressures added because of becoming mothers. The third book was about silence. And the fourth book is Transnational Narratives in Englishes of Exile. I have published in these four fields, and these are my most commonly used in my teaching and my writing. So one of the things that I try to avoid is to not repeat myself, because people tend to get bored when you repeat yourself. So I'm trying to, like with my own English, I'm trying to add new things to my writing. I think I will continue writing creatively just because it's a different way of expressing my ideas, at least at the moment.
Mm-hmm. So this much about writing. What about reading? How do bookstores, libraries, different authors play a part in your own decisions as to what you're writing, and what do you read? What would you recommend that we read? What if there are any authors that have shaped your understanding of the human condition in exile, or of your writing topics as a whole?
In terms of reading, of course, because I have an interdisciplinary approach in comparative theater, medical humanities, and visual arts, I read to satisfy these three fields of study. When it comes to reading, especially the more I mature, the more selective I become. It really has to be about a foreign experience. Not only, someone who's really from a different place that I am, but different background, different, because I feel again that if I want to expand my way of understanding diversity, the best way is to read something that is and feels foreign. I may not fully understand that perspective, but it will give me the opportunity to add to this ongoing humanities approach to life. I wanted to say before, but I completely forgot about the cover. In addition to really thanking everybody who contributed to the collection, the 12 contributors, Sabina being one of them, I wanted also to thank Antoine José, who is a French painter. He graciously allowed me permission to use the painting as the front cover of my book, and it's titled La Dérive des Continents, and I chose this as the front cover for my book because the title is self-explanatory, the image is self-explanatory. The only thing that I would add is that sometimes a simple gesture could help the other. And the more we try to knock on the official doors, probably the less successful we will be. But if we, as a community, try to reach out, we will probably have better results. And having said that, this is a collection of essays that could be read by people in academia, but could be easily read by people who are not involved in academia, but they are definitely involved in immigration. They are definitely been through a story that could resemble their own experience. So it's truly relatable in many ways.
Yeah, that's actually very important. It's a book about exile in many ways, even though apparently it's an academic book. In fact, there is so much about academic discourse that opens up to a general public, and I think anybody who has been in exile in any way will find something interesting to read about. So let's talk some more about the book and how it came together. How did you select the articles? There's a huge variety of cultural and geographical spaces that are addressed. So it literally spans the world and kind of, I mean, what brings everything together is this space of Englishes. Diasporic writing in Englishes of exile.
Englishes, yes. When I placed the call for papers and I received like 30 proposals, I was truly interested in using the word English in plural. This word was introduced in the late 70s, and it was introduced as World Englishes. So from 1978 until today, it is surprising for me as a professor to realize that we are still using English in singular, and this is actually something that I'm trying over and over to make sure that we correct this. It's not one English, it's not mono English. There are so many Englishes, and just choosing from the proposal that I received was kind of difficult because so many were truly great. But I ended up with 12 plus mine. And in one chapter, for example, an author discusses about English at the border of Mexico and the United States. There is another chapter where a scholar discusses about housewives, Chinese housewives in the 50s, and how isolated they were and how they couldn't have, access to English, British English. There is another chapter that discusses about Iranian literature in translation. Their authors, desire to write in English instead of writing in Persian. There is another chapter about an author who was born in Dominica, but then she traveled to the United Kingdom. There is another chapter where the author talks about a futuristic novel set up in a maybe not so distant future where borders are something that are not going to be so important as they are today. So the selection of the chapters was truly trying to focus on the other word that I was telling you about, the first word in the collection, transnational. And again, to go back to this very important idea of the foreigner. What is a foreigner? Aren't we all foreigners to ourselves at one point? If we look back at our identities 10 years from now, I think I find myself foreigner to things that I used to like and things that I used to not like. Ovid, the one whose statue I spoke in the beginning, just put things in perspective for me, because the place of birth is random. It invites us, to learn a language, a mother tongue. It invites us to be open to rituals, to traditions, to things that we discover later are not even just belonging to one country, but to one region. So what exactly is the foreigner? What exactly is this immigrant, this person whom we, for some reason, we maybe don't want to invite into our houses? So this is a collection that, again, speaks up about people who use Englishes and people who would like to validate everybody's experience in Englishes.
This idea that foreignness is important to each of us I think plays a very important part both in your collection and in your writing as a whole, because you said a little bit earlier that you're interested in experiences that are foreign, or there has to be something foreign about it. Well, Kristeva's book, Strangers to Ourselves, which was published back in 91 or something like that, I believe, it is referred to at least by Oana Chivoiu in the collection, when she writes about mothers without frontiers. I think it's very, very relevant because Kristeva says that, well, there is a foreign part within ourselves. Foreignness is within ourselves, and I guess all of us are having to confront that. And when we are faced with a different culture, or we live in a different country, we have to address that more specifically. And that's how you get to know yourself, when you're confronted with foreignness, right? Would you like to tell us a bit about your own chapter, actually? Because I think that's got a lot to do both with foreignness and with your choice of the cover. In fact, the cover is particularly relevant to your own chapter, I feel.
Yes. My chapter, it was interesting because I titled it Mizanabim with My Immigrants. And I ended up talking about 9 different people, some of them writers, others artists, and trying to introduce each of them. I said I am each of these people, because I feel that we have a shared experience. We have an overlapping experience of some sort. When I was in Romania, of course, I knew only Romanian. I was just traveling on one lane, Romanian everywhere, to my right and to my left. And then I came to the United States and I met so many people of various backgrounds. And I couldn't say who I was. Like, I knew my name, I knew when I was born, but I wasn't just, the old self. I met with so many people personally or directly, or through reading or going to an art exhibit and so on and so forth. So in my chapter, I talk about writers and also artists, and they have both shaped my interdisciplinary approach to writing and understanding exile, immigration.
Along this line of having to confront yourself in, you've mentioned being in the States and coming to the States, and you do write in the introduction about, or is it in your chapter, about a student who asks you where you come from, and this "where are you from" question haunts all of us when we are confronted with a foreign background. How would you reevaluate that question in the light of your experience after all these years?
This year actually marks my 20th here in the United States. The episode Sabina is referring to happened immediately after I became an American citizen. I was very proud and infused with a new sense of identity, and I went to school. It was the first day of school, the spring break that year, and there was this student who came early, and she knocked on the door and she said, "May I come in?" I said, yes. And we started to talk, and she said, "So where are you from?" And that morning I knew I was American. And then the question "Oh, so where am I from exactly?" Of course I answered her briefly, but then in the back of my head I started to rethink the question, where am I from exactly? I am, I guess, in between. There is always that space in between. You're also traveling a lot, and you experience this state of in-betweenness. I think this is the best, state. Referring back to Ovid, this idea of belonging to a country, it is relevant. But once get the chance to experience the immigrant status, then you discover something better, something more that you didn't know it was before. So speaking of that, I was going to see if I can ask you maybe to talk about your chapter, which is also an interesting chapter talking about a Romanian writer who doesn't live in Romania, right?
Yeah, well, that was interesting too. I mean, it's just as emotional to me as what you described is to you, because so my chapter is about Ioana Băietică Morpurgo's novel The Imigranții, which is in Romanian. Actually, it was written in Romanian, and I was confronting the Romanian text, and it was interesting to do that. And I was quite interested in the fact that you asked me to prepare that chapter for your collection, which was about Englishes, whereas this is a novel written in Romanian. However, it's a novel about about 5 characters who come from Romania but who live in London and who are confronted with the English space as immigrants. And that was very personal to me, because I spent quite a few years in England doing my PhD at the University of East Anglia in Norwich, and I felt very close to a lot of those experiences they went through. So, in a sense, as you know, I took a long time writing that chapter because it was very personal to me. So I had to work out all that experience. Yeah, I had to translate a lot of stuff and to negotiate a lot between what I had lived through and what these characters were, and it was very interesting working on it, actually, because we started. I mean, you were mentioning. I mean, in our previous conversation, we were talking about the different stages this collection went through. So there was the abstract, and then working through various stages of writing the chapter, and then revision. And it does something like this, which is of course an academic text addressing or interpreting a novel, but which feels so personal because you yourself have gone through experiences like that. Has to, I mean, takes a lot of thinking and a lot of reconsideration of your of how you as a person relate to your own writing and to your own writing, to your own academic interpretation of the literary space, but also this very difficult question of I think we are going over time a little. I think the business of translation and communication is particularly relevant nowadays, when the world is going through a lot of processes of relocation and reconsiderations of various kinds, and I felt, when I started writing this chapter, I felt it would be particularly relevant to think about translation and about the idea of Englishes in relation to a novel that was written in my native tongue, but that was about the experience of living within English, within an English-speaking space, as a space of exile. So it was a formative experience, I have to say, and I'm very, very grateful I had it. I had to go through it. What about Englishes at the academic level?
Yeah, this was my question. I wanted to see if students in Bucharest, if they know, if they are aware of the concept, if they hear it from the first time when you introduce the concept, or if they have any level of familiarity with the concept of Englishes.
My students certainly do. I mean, the students I taught have had to come to terms with the plurality of English, because I teach ethnic American literatures, diasporic writing in English, and I'm generally interested in the global space of writing in English, a little bit like you, actually. So I did my PhD on contemporary Indian fiction in English, which was again an English that was not native, but it was, on the other hand, inherited and thought a little bit like American English itself, actually, because we tend to forget that America itself was an English colony back until when it became free. So English is we do teach English in the plural in Bucharest, and I believe in the States it has to be taught in the plural as well, doesn't it? What about your own students?
Well, some of them are aware, but not all of them. So Depending on what class I teach, for example, this semester I teach a course on immigration and English, is because I created this course and I wanted, to make sure that I'm using again the two words that I'm most interested. Immigration and Englishes, and depending on how they answer, I spend a lot of time in familiarizing the students with the concept, and I tell them to spread the word. The interest that I have in English is to make sure that we don't focus on the perfect English. This idea of perfection in English has a tendency to close other experience, to leave other experience out. So this is the thing that I'm trying to promote over and over again. I'm not going to take any lessons, and after spending 20 years it would not make sense anyway, but I'm not going to get rid of my accent. People should be proud of their origins. People should be applauded when they are trying to speak in a language that is not theirs, and again validating their English and continuing with the Englishes in plural.
I think it's a very important fact that languages are ultimately meant for communication.
Yes.
And what we should be doing would be to communicate as opposed to arguing with each other or fighting each other. Well, thank you very much, Catalina, and I think, it's been a privilege to have this dialogue with you, and I'm sure this book will raise a lot of interest in the academic and non-academic reading audiences.
Thank you so much. Thank you.